Greetings. Before you enter into the churches this weekend to celebrate Easter, there's something that you need to know. In the letter to the Thessalonians, verse 5:21 says, "Prove all things." So view the video and you can make a decision. Easter is a day that falls during the first Gregorian month, usually in March, the end of March into the first week of April, depending on how the calendar, which follows the spring equinox, the vernal equinox. So the history of Easter, the principal festival of the Christian church year. They're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ on the third day after his crucifixion. Now, the origins of Easter date back past Christianity, and it's become one of the oldest observations after their Sabbath, which stayed on Sunday. Now, there are a lot of things that has been added to the Easter celebration. So let me read from the book according to Acts chapter 12, verse 1-6. Now about the time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. Verse 2, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. Verse 3, and because he saw it pleased the Judites, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then the days of the unleavened bread. Those were the days of the unleavened bread. Verse 4, and when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. So now we have two things going on. They were celebrating the people, or the Israelites that were left in Judah, who were called Jews. They were celebrating the Passover and the unleavened bread, because the unleavened bread represented coming out of Egypt in haste. So the bread had an opportunity to rise. So that's why they have no leaven or no yeast inside of the bread. And in those days, they used yeast to give rise to the bread. So I just read Acts 12, 1-6. Now, the word Easter, we find, is it the same like the Easter we have today? Let's take a look and see. Now, Easter, the Strong's Concordance is what it used, very general, very basic, but it breaks down the Hebrew and the Greek. So we're in the New Testament, it's Aramaic Greek. The Strong's number is 3957, and it's called Pascha. And Pascha means the Passover. The Passover supper or the lamb. So it has 3 things, synonyms it can mean. So this one is talking about the Passover. And today, they're talking about the Passover of the Lamb of JC, of Jesus. So, now part of the speech is an Aramaic transliterated word. So Pascha is the celebration of the Passover. Leviticus 23 verse 4. These are the feasts of the Almighty, even the holy or set apart convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. Verse 5, in the 14th day of the first month, which is the month of Abib, or the month of Nisan, at evening is the Almighty's Passover. It's his Passover. Verse 6, and on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Almighty. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Verse 7, in the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. Verse 8, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Father 7 days. In the 7th day is a set apart convocation. You shall do no servile work therein, which is the 7th day. Shabbat. Now, some of these things, of course, we know we cannot do, but we definitely can observe it. And there are other things that we can do. But the sacrifice we cannot do in this land, because this land is not the land we're supposed to do it in. But at the same time, we are instructed to do the will, follow the commandments, and follow the laws. Now, when we go to Deuteronomy chapter 16, Deuteronomy is the final discourse. And this is the book. The summarization is in Deuteronomy. It's the last book of the law. Okay, Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover unto the Almighty thy power. For in the month of Abib, the Almighty Creator, your strength, brought you forth out of Egypt by night. You shall, verse 2, you shall therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Almighty thy strength of the flock on the herd in the place which the Almighty shall choose to place his name there. You shall not eat bread with it, no leavened bread with it. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction. For you came forth out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day when you came forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. That is the reason why we eat unleavened bread on those days that's required, on the 15th day for 7 days. Verse 4, and there shall be no leavened bread, no leavened bread, no leavened bread seen within all thy coast 7 days. No leavened bread. Get rid of red leavened bread. You can do that. Neither shall there anything of flesh which you sacrifice the first day at the evening remain all night unto the morning. So nothing that you made that night should be around, to no leftovers. Verse 5, you may not sacrifice the Passover within any of thy gates, which the Almighty your strength give you, but at the place, verse 6, but at the place which the Almighty your strength shall choose to place his name in, there shall sacrifice, there you shall sacrifice the Passover at evening, at the going down of the sun, at the season that you came forth out of Egypt. What was the season? The month or the time of Abib. And that's during the vernal equinox, according to the book of Enoch. We can check it. Verse 7, and you shall roast and eat it in the place which the Almighty thy strength shall choose. And you shall turn in the morning and go into your tents. 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day shall be a solemn assembly to the Almighty your strength. You shall do no work therein. Okay? Very important to know this. Now let's see what the book, according to Mark, chapter 14, verse 12 to 16. It reads, and the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, so at that time they were doing the Passover as historically mentioned in Exodus chapter 14, 12 to 14. His disciples said unto him, where will you that we go and prepare that you may eat the Passover? Verse 13, and he sent forth 2 of his disciples and said unto them, go you into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. Verse 14, and wheresoever he shall go in, say you to the good man of the house, Master saith, where is the guest chamber where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? Verse 15, and he will show you a large upper room furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. Verse 16, and his disciples went forth and came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. So apparently they were eating the lamb as prescribed by the law in Leviticus chapter 23. and a few other places in the Old Testament, specifically in the Torah. You'll find between Exodus and Deuteronomy, you'll find the Passover mentioned, unleavened bread, and so forth. And I will leave it in the ad, some parts of it, so you will be able to see it. Now, the Paschal lamb, the lamb which the Israelites were accustomed to slay and eat on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, or the month of Abib, as it was called during the time, to represent the air barley of the barley plant. The first month of the year. So that was the first month of the year, in memory of that day which their fathers prepared to depart from Egypt when they were in bondage. They were bidden by the Almighty to slay and eat the lamb, and to sprinkle their doorposts with its blood, as to make mark, and the destroying angel will know where the mark of the blood was. Seeing the blood might pass over the dwelling. So that's Passover. That's what Passover is. Exodus chapter 12, Numbers chapter 9, and Deuteronomy chapter 16. You read it for yourself and you will see what this is pertaining to. So the Passover lamb has nothing to do, according to the law itself, it's the time when Israel became out of bondage, out of Egypt, and they became a nation. And also the Passover was to identify that the angel would pass over the ones who had the blood of the lamb, a real lamb, not a man, at this point. And that's where the Passover was instituted, and that's where the Passover is. Now, the Chaldean origin, which is similar to the people of Babylon, is called Pekah, the Passover, the meal, the day, the festival, or the special sacrifices connected with it, Easter and Passover. So we know that these words are synonyms. They have the similar meanings. Okay. Now, Easter is a pagan festival. Today it is a pagan festival. It has nothing to do with the origin of the book of the law, the Old Testament, or of even in the book according to Acts, where they were celebrating what the word Easter meant, Passover. Now, if Easter isn't really about Jesus, then what is it about? Who is it referencing? We know that during the times that the Northern Kingdom and some of the others used to worship the goddess Ishtar or Astar, and they used things just like bunny rabbits, chocolate, eggs, and today you have people having egg hunts and rabbits and gift baskets and all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the origin of Passover. I do have a video in here about Passover. You can take a look at it and then you can reference it with this. No need to keep going back and forth. So since long time in history, they've been having some sort of sacrifices. Now, in etymology, the word of Old English, because the Bible is translated and transliterated from the Hebrew tongue, and when they read it in the New Testament, it's from Greek. Some of it is Greek, some of it is Latin, and some Old English then to modern English. Now, the Old English called Easterdag from Eastery, from Proto-Germanic, it's German, it's English. Dawn, also the name of a goddess of fertility and spring, perhaps originally of sunrise, whose feast was celebrated at the spring equinox from east towards the rising of the sun. So we see that this is relative. That's why they hold this event during the spring equinox, almost the same time as the Passover. Okay, so let's see more. The BD says Anglo-Saxon Christians adopted her name and many of the celebratory practices for their Mass of Christ's resurrection, So they incorporated this into Christianity. Almost all neighboring languages used a variant of Latin Pascha to name this holiday. See Pascal. Easter egg, attested by 1825. Earlier pace, eggs. 1610. Easter bunny rabbit, attested by 1904 in children's lessons. Easter rabbit, by 1888, they were using Easter rabbit, and the paganish customs of Easter seems to have grown popular. By 1900, before that, they were limited to German immigrants. This is definitely a European created system and celebration. It has nothing to do with the original Passover lamb, Passover celebration, Passover observation. So why do they celebrate this? And when they celebrate it, what's the purpose of it? So this is today they celebrate the Easter as a resurrection of Jesus Christ, as I read earlier. Now, in the first couple of centuries after Jesus' life, the feast days in the new Christian church were attached to the old pagan festivals. Most countries in Europe, the name Easter is derived from the children of Israel festival of the Passover. So this came from the Passover. So they took different customs and put it together, and this is what paganism is. It takes different cultures and put it together, and then it'll make something of it. It has no origin. The origin is not from their own religion. So in the Greek, the feast is called Pascha. In Italy, it's Pasqua. In Danish, it's Pasik. And in French, it's Pâques. Now, we know that today there are things associated with Easter, which we call Astor, was a goddess of spring, of renewing. And that's why her feast is attached to the vernal equinox. So when we look and you see things like rabbits and eggs and all these symbols, this is part of the indoctrination of using other systems and other symbols to create modern day Easter. Okay, Easter today is actually a pagan celebration according to the historical aspect of it. Many pagan customs has been associated with the celebration of spring and have become incorporated in the Christian symbols of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Again, eggs is a symbol of new life. Also, the bunny rabbit. It has a lot of offsprings. Also, during the time of the celebration is spring, when things new birth comes out in spring. And that is the spring festival, which brings in new life from the cold climate. And this is definitely a cold climate event when they use those type of things. We use the vernal equinox or the spring equinox to represent a new season, and that's how we know, but it's not to celebrate Easter eggs and bunny rabbits and chocolates and gift baskets and all the other things. Now the Easter date was changed in about 325 AD. The Council of Nicaea by Constantine determined that Easter should fall on a Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox. So that's why we have that today. And Sunday represents the birth or the resurrection of the Christ according to the book of Mark, chapter 15. And that is why the date moved by when Easter festivals are often referred to as movable feast. So every year it's not fall on the same date, because they use the Gregorian calendar and they're using 365 days per year, so you would not fall on the same date next year. Now there was a period when between March 25th and April 25th on which Easter Sunday must fall, and that determined by the movement of the planets and the sun. So they used the planetary position to determine the date for their Easter. Now today we see a lot of these cultures who do spring equinoxes. They celebrate the resurrection. Now this resurrection is something of their belief system, and it has nothing to do with what the original Passover was. The symbolic pieces of the death of the sun on the cross and the constellations, rebirth and darknesses and afterlife, these are all part of their belief system. Now the Sumerian goddess Inanna or Ishtar was hung naked on a stake and was resurrected and ascended from the underworld. This is one of the oldest resurrection myths in Egypt. The Egyptians Horus or Haru, born on the 25th day of December in Haru, and his damaged eye became a symbol of life and rebirth. Then the Mitra was born, which we call Christmas Day, and his followers celebrated the spring equinox. In the late 4th century AD, the Sol Invictus associated with the Mitra was the last heathen cult of this religion, and they overcame Dionysus, that divine child, and resurrected by his mother. So all these other, you got so many different twists on this particular holiday that they call, and they incorporate it into the church system where we some erroneously follow. So these are some things we have to make sure that we do not follow and be in error and cast our opportunity for salvation and that walk by transgression and following after different things that's not supposed to be. So with the bunny rabbits and the hair and the exchange of eggs and hot cross buns, because of hot cross buns in the book of Jeremiah, they were making buns and cakes for the Queen of Heaven, the same Asteroid. So these are things that we know that the transgression of the Israelites used to bake in those sweet buns for the idols, or hot cross buns. Look at their hot cross buns, and they bake them on Easter, and they represent them up to the Queen of Heaven. So there's two things going on Easter. You got the Queen of Heaven, and you got Jesus going on, the male and female. That is just incredible, and that has nothing to do with the Passover that's in the scripture, and that is what it says. Now, we know that these things are taken. We have to use discernment. We can't just follow everyone when they do certain things. There are things that we call generational bondage, and we inherit these things from our parents, but we have to look at things closely. Okay, so don't get confused. Just read and ask the Almighty for the understanding of what is to do and what not to do, so we do not get caught and lose our salvation. Eating Easter eggs and bunny rabbits and chocolate this, and spending a whole ton of money on clothes, going into an establishment that has nothing to do with your salvation. On that note, hallelujah.